It's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. Emil Amok to you. How are you? Welcome to this thing we do in my closet Monday through Friday. This is Monday. Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, live. Me and my John Madden Memorial headset, wherever you're watching us, YouTube, Twitter, at Emil Amok, amok.com. We're live. I put this on to give me that sense of control. But it's Monday, a big history day for me. I just couldn't wait to talk to you. But we're going to talk about DACA and the Dreamers. We're going to talk about matriculation. Do you know where you matriculated? It's important, your matriculation. We're going to talk about the importance of matriculation in a bit. Something that FDR did. You history buffs will want to stay tuned for that. We start at 2 p.m. Pacific. You say, Emil, you're a little early, aren't you? It's like only like 1:57 Pacific time. Well, I come on early sometimes because I like to do this thing called the lanyap, the little something extra. And I'm doing something extra tonight at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. I'm doing my story time, as you see on the crawl. I've got this thing that crawls, on the screen. It's pay what you want at Eventbrite. It's a virtual pop-up, Emil Amok story time. I do these story time shows that pop up on Facebook or YouTube, or this is going to be on Eventbrite. And you can also go, and do other things. You have options. They'll give you options on what you do. But at 5:30 p.m., we're going to do this show, Emil Amok story time, the slamless slam. I don't know. So I call it something like that. No one gets hurt. Everyone's a winner. No, it's a storytelling show. I'm going to tell the story about how, I talk about my dad a lot. You know that. I got daddy issues, as they say. I talk about my dad a lot still. Even I'm a dad. Haven't learned. But my father, it's an important day for him, and I'll get to that in a second. But tonight's story time is about how we didn't do anything really together. We didn't do anything together. I mean, we didn't hunt, thank goodness. We didn't fish. Oh, thank goodness for that either. I mean, hunting and fishing, that's not my thing. I'm sorry, I'm a vegan. But we gambled together. And I talk about how my dad and I gambled. It's an interesting story. We took the cheap Chinatown bus and we went to Reno and we scored. We scored. Well, you're going to have to see the story or hear the story. I tell the story. And I'm joined by 3 other tellers, and they're going to come up and tell other stories. The theme of the storytelling event is freedom. And you'll learn what we freed ourselves of. Listen to the stories tonight, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Go to Eventbrite. It's pay what you want. Also known as donation, also known as pass the hat, also known as I could be busking, but no, pay what you want. And even if it's nothing, although I don't think Eventbrite lets you get away with paying nothing. But if 4 storytellers telling you at least 10 minutes of story, that's like 40 minutes total. If that's not worth $1, I think $1 is the minimum if you go through Eventbrite. But check it out, 5:30 Pacific today. That 5:30 Pacific, that would be 7:30 Central and 8:30 Eastern. And I say it in that way because we have a teller in Maine. Charlie Gould is going to join me. And we have Erilyn Hughes, who's in the Central Time Zone. In I believe she's in Texas. And then Julian Simeon is in California, as I am. It's 4 storytellers really telling some interesting stories relating to freedom, virtual pop-up Emil Amok Storytime Show. It's today, Monday. And you might say, Emil, you didn't give us much warning. Well, yeah, it's a pop-up. Maybe I don't want you to go. Maybe I'm using a little reverse psychology. Maybe if I don't tell them, they won't come. Well, certainly that will happen. But they're good stories. They'll tell you something about all their different experiences. It's not necessarily all Asian. I don't believe. Marilyn's from Texas and Charlie's from Maine. Julian might have a Filipino story. I certainly will tell a Filipino story. That's all tonight. Check it out. Eventbrite. Look for Emil Amok Storytime on Eventbrite. And check it out. Less than an hour, in and out. No babysitter. No driving. Just come, listen, enjoy the show in your virtual environment. And we hope you make it. All right? I got to plug my sounder. My talk show sounder, of course. So, welcome to the program. This is Emil Amok's Take Out My Takes on All Things Considerable. A lot to consider today. As I said, the story about my dad, the reason why this is a significant day is because it's 7/11. 7/11. On this day, my father arrived from the Philippines. And you might say, yeah, Emil, yeah, okay, good. I think I heard that. No. You don't know. Well, first of all, to go back to the storytelling thing, two of the storytellers in the class or in tonight's story show are people I met in a class that I took given by the preeminent monologist, Mike Daisy. Interesting class in the Daisy technique. And what is the Daisy technique? The Daisy technique is I did extemporaneous speaking. I did debate. I'm going to tell this story off the top of my head. Although it's not off the top of your head, it's deep in your heart. That's the difference. It is real. It's authentic. It's inside. And when it comes out, you just don't know what you're going to get. It could be something really far more special than a storyteller who has taken the Hamlet soliloquy, alas, poor York, has then tried to internalize those words and try to figure out, am I holding a skull or am I holding a basketball? Alas, poor York, 4.6 points, 10 rebounds a game. I guess his height worked to his advantage, except when he fell, which is why I'm holding a skull. Or is it a basketball? So, the thing is, scripting and writing, it's a different thing. Storytelling is an oral mode. And tonight, I know I'm going to do it storytelling Daisy style. And I know that two others who took that class were going to do it storytelling Daisy style too. So you don't know what's going to happen. And that's why it's important to catch a show. It's going to be live, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Go to Eventbrite and figure out how to get a ticket there. And there. So I went back to talking about the story, but history. Why today's day is important. 7/11, my father came, and he came a poor Filipino kid, but with a difference. He came with a dream. My father was just 22. He came with his brother Joe. He got on a boat, paid $60, 30 days on a boat. He had one good suit. I think this is what his one good suit looked like. He and his brother Joe. Joe's a slightly taller one. My father's a slightly smaller one. You'll have to decide. Who do you think is cutest there? I know. Uncle Joe has a kind of a boyish look. He was younger. My father is the closest one to me on the screen. And look, they're wearing white pants. How can you be a poor kid wearing white pinstripe pants? It's got to mean that you're very careful. Because, white shows dirt and that kind of thing. You're wearing white pants and a blazer. You're looking really jazz age, looking for that damsel in the flapper dress. I mean, they were ready for the 20s. My father came to America in 1928, 94 years ago. And that's why I'm telling the story. Telling the story of his arrival. Because what did he think coming in 1928? What did he think he would find? The pot of gold that was missing from the Philippines, he'd find it at the other end of the rainbow. Once he went across the Pacific Ocean from the Philippines to San Francisco. That's my story. I mean, so I'm going to talk about that. My father was one of about, a couple thousand Filipino men, about 30,000 who were in America in the 20s. And they came here essentially to replace the Chinese who were excluded, you'll recall. And they came in the 20s to be a workforce, essentially. But they weren't allowed to start a family. They weren't allowed to do any of that. They were here to work. So my father came here and went to work in restaurants. He did not want to work in the fields. And he worked in the restaurants in San Francisco, and then he experienced the racism that these men faced in the 1920s, which was couldn't marry, couldn't own land, couldn't marry who you wanted, couldn't marry whites. Oh, if you're marrying whites, you can get beaten up for that. So I remember this day, the day my father arrived, 7/11, 1928. What's interesting about this, and now, we talk really about how history impacts, the racist history toward Filipinos. We see my father was allowed to come in 1928, but on July 10th, 1935, 7 years later, President Roosevelt signs the Filipino Repatriation Act. And the Filipino Repatriation Act was intended to lure Filipinos back to the Philippines. They came here to the Philippines because they were colonized, right? Because of the 1898 war. The Filipinos were Americans, but they didn't want to call them citizens. They didn't want to call them, but they weren't Filipinos because they were essentially owned by the U.S. They called them American nationals, wards of the state. Snazzy dressing wards of the state. But they caused all this ruckus here in the United States because people would claim, those snazzy dressing Filipinos were taking away jobs. Oh, those snazzy dressing Filipinos, they were taking away women. And then there was this fear, what I have called Filipinophobia. What did Roosevelt do? 1935, he said, Filipinos, you go back. Because Roosevelt was getting pressure from folks in California who wanted the Filipinos out. They didn't want these smiling guys with nice suits coming in here. And they just wanted Filipinos out. So the Repatriation Act was a way to kind of move the Filipinos out and say, you can self-deport. But did they? Most of the Filipinos were proud, like my dad. My dad had the choice to go back, but he didn't, because he knew that if he went back, how embarrassing that would be to go back to the Philippines after You scrounged up $60 for for fare on a steamboat for 30 days to America in your one good suit. So, yeah, there were about 30,000 Filipinos here. It was too many Filipinos. And so the Repatriation Act of 1935 was signed by Roosevelt. Did it work? No. They did not want to self-deport. Self-deporting? Come on. They weren't going to give up America without a fight. They stayed on, and the racism continued. 1935 to 45. My father wasn't able to marry because of the discrimination against Filipinos until like the mid 50s. And then I was born. Anyway, it's part of the interesting story. I tell some of his story tonight on, and also how we gambled. That's on my Storytime show. But here's why I bring this up now. Because 7-Eleven today, my father and Joe come here to America. And I just want to honor that. Because how many people know that history? Not very many. I mean, they don't teach it in high school. But now, there's a movement to teach these little things, these items in history that have been kind of passed over. They're trying to teach Asian American history, all the different ethnicities perhaps, in high school. And then also this move is happening at the highest levels of academia. I'm talking about Harvard University, which finally began to start hiring for its $40 million Asian American Studies program. $40 million was the amount that they got in terms of Asian American wealth that was contributed to the program. Last week, they announced that Erica Lee, granddaughter of Chinese immigrants, grew up in the Bay Area, made her name at the University of Minnesota. We talked about it briefly last week, but I do want to mention how significant this is, because Erica Lee was a former student of the late Ron Takaki, perhaps the most famous Asian American historian to date. And Erica Lee is probably, I think, without question, one of the next generation Takakis out there. And certainly The Making of Asian America, I have it on my shelf. The Making of Asian America, a history. She published it in 2016. She joins Taeku Lee, who's a government professor at Berkeley. They're the first two hires. So it's a sign that Harvard is getting serious about Asian Americans. And what do you know? 94 years after my father arrives. Maybe at some point more people will know about the group of Filipinos that were like among the first 30,000 on the mainland, and the kind of experience they had, which is not a pretty experience. The kind of racism and discrimination they faced. It's part of what we do. It's really the American pattern. So it's a good thing Harvard has this going on right at the time when Harvard itself is becoming more and more Asian American. And this is significant because of this lawsuit that's going to be heard by the Supreme Court later this year on the admissions policies at Harvard. Some people think they're discriminatory. Those people who think it's discriminatory, many of whom are Asian American. I don't know why, because if you look at the numbers, the matriculation number at Harvard is around 83%. Now, matriculation, that's just a matriculation, 5-syllable word that says you're going there. So the rate of people who were accepted and said, we're going, we're coming, was 83%, which is not 100, but you got to figure, boy, 83% say yes to Harvard. That means like 17% tell Harvard to go to hell. I mean, it's kind of interesting in a way. 83% was the matriculation rate. But here's the news about the matriculation rate. Now, last week, they put together all the stats, and it shows that the white members of the class, of this incoming class of 2026, are now at 42.5%, which is a sharp drop from 47.2% last year's class of 2025. You take the last four classes and you do the math, and it looks like Harvard is a lot less white than it's ever been, and a lot more Asian. I mean, this was kind of my surprise when I went back to Boston this summer. I had a class reunion, went back. It was like, I saw some Filipinos and they saw me, and it was no big deal. And it used to be that if you found yourself in Cambridge or any place on the East Coast and you're Filipino, they're Filipino, you take a double take, you take a triple take, and then, the next thing, you're sharing each other's lumpia recipes. I mean, it's like, brother, sister, it's like there was a sense of, it's like aliens meeting in a foreign galaxy, and they see that they are from the same tribe, and they do the secret handshake, and they say, wow, he's from my galaxy. Oh, she's from my galaxy. And then I think I saw that in a Star Trek episode. They connected. That was in my day. Now you go there and you realize that Asian Americans and Filipinos are just part of the mix. I was in an elevator with a Filipino guy. I just, random. What are the odds, right? Two Filipino guys in an elevator with nothing to do except scroll our phones. And I don't even think he looked at me. I didn't look at him. Well, I saw him. I wasn't like checking him out or anything. I was just saying, hey, in the old days, I would say, hey, pare, or something. I'd say something in Tagalog or something, even though I don't speak Tagalog well. But we would connect. Now it was like nothing, because Filipinos, Asian Americans are just part of the mix. And this fall, the class of 2026, 27.6% Asian. That's up from last fall's class, 25.3. So this trend means that all the Asians, 25.75%, that's more than a quarter of the school, is Asian or Asian American. Add blacks at around 14%. That's roughly 39%. Add Latinos, like you're at 51%, roughly. And Harvard will be a BIPOC minority, or majority rather. A black, indigenous, people of color majority at Harvard. I mean, it had to happen. It's happening. I mean, consider all that and question why it looks like a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court seems poised to end the way affirmative action and admissions works at Harvard. You got to wonder, is there possibly too many people of color? Is the admissions process just too successful, producing a class that's just too diverse for Harvard's past? Or is it just a smokescreen to get the white numbers back up? Oh, you're doing things too well. We got to change your admissions process. You're doing diversity too well. So I've talked about the Harvard suit for some time, and you may know it. My opinion of that suit against Harvard, brought by that faction of Asian American students and parents who have been misguided by anti-affirmative action legal activists. My opinion is that the lower court got it right when it sided with Harvard. So The Supreme Court doesn't have to do anything. Just affirm what the First Circuit Court of Federal Court of Appeals did. What I fear is if it doesn't and the admissions process changes, either there's a way to keep things more balanced, maybe, or maybe the Asian American plaintiffs get what they want. But will it be what everyone else wants? When the number of Asian Americans get as high as, say, UC Berkeley's. Now here, get this. At Berkeley, the numbers for the past incoming class of 2021, or in 2021, was 41.4% Asian. 41, and Harvard was some people were complaining that Harvard was 28%. Well, the Asians weren't. They said, well, Harvard should be 41.4% too. Look, I'm an Asian American. I think, I think that would be great, especially for the premier public university in the U.S., Cal, Berkeley, based in California. 41.4%, California, the most Asian American state in the country. That's great. But would 41.4% be fair for a school based in the East Coast, where there are fewer Asians, which is a school that's drawing all over the country, like Harvard? Would that be fair? And so I think this fall, I hope that the Supreme Court doesn't stop the progress that's happening at Harvard, where they've managed with a system that uses race as one factor among many to create a diverse campus. And this is an approach used not just by Harvard, but by other schools as well. And I think what the Harvard experience shows is it can work, and it does get the best results for all. But we're talking about this conservative high court, hell-bent on putting America in reverse. And if they take away affirmative action, they take away an important tool that has been used to promote diversity in our schools. So that brings us back to this idea of DACA, the Dreamers. And, in my columns, I talk about the Dreamers. The Dreamers, DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. They're called Dreamers because they have a dream. Just like my father came here and had a dream. But my father was undocumented. My father was undocumented too, but he didn't need one, right? Because of the 1898 war, the Philippine-American War, where the Americans beat the Filipinos and then colonized the country. So that is a big difference between the Dreamers and my dad. Still, my dad was able to come here. He was able to arrive, live some of his life, eventually live all of his life. It took some time. It took some doing. The question now is, when are the Dreamers going to be able to arrive and live their life? And we know there are Asian American Dreamers. We know there are African Dreamers and Latinx Dreamers. And here's the thing. These people are endangered if the law isn't fixed. I mean, some of the Dreamers are aging in place. As long as the law is in this kind of limbo, they're fine. But there are legal efforts to declare DACA, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, as illegal. And last week at the Fifth Circuit in Louisiana, they held arguments on the major points. Number one, is DACA legal in the first place? If whether all procedures were followed. They also wanted to hear if there wasn't an undue burden on states like Texas and other states that joined in, like Louisiana, that felt that the Dreamers posed this financial hardship, a burden. And it's funny, one of the most active participants in the hearings, three-panel judge, Judge James C. Ho, 49 years old, from Taipei. He's born in Taipei, but educated and raised in California. And from all the reports that I've seen, he seemed to be the most antagonistic. In fact, he kept wondering, how are you going to prove this? You don't have this in your paperwork about the procedures. And then Judge Ho pulled out something from the Supreme Court opinion that said that the court viewed DACA critically, not just as a forbearance policy, but as an affirmative immigration rewrite. In other words, the judge was saying, hey, look, DACA not only protects these people who don't have all their documents, but it also gives them work permits and driver's licenses. And isn't that a little much? I mean, he made it sound like he was going to come down on DACA and the Dreamers. I mean, but to call it an affirmative immigration rewrite, I mean, that was kind of a red flag to me. And so we're dealing with a court that is reversing Roe. They're going to hear the affirmative action case next fall. They're going to hear cases on voting rights. They're going to hear cases on all these matters that would have appeared to be somewhat more settled, but now is coming under attack by a very activist conservative court. And now, if you include, this Fifth Circuit Court ruling on DACA, could happen in the next couple months. If it does, it almost certainly will get to the Supreme Court, no matter what it rules. Both sides are ready to appeal. I just think it's just another one of those items that you put on potential setbacks that will certainly create more chaos and division in America. I mean, in the best case, we endure. In the worst case, it'll be a new chapter that only confirms the historical patterns we've seen before in the making and unmaking of Asian America. So there's my dad. Oh, I left my dad up. I shouldn't have put him up there so long. But I'm telling you, you wear white pants. That shows courage. That shows confidence. Got my white pleated pants. Got my pinstripe white pleated pants. I got my hair pomaded back. I'm ready to take on the world. Part of history. And part of that pattern. So, check out, I'll talk more about the Storytime show in a second. But can you imagine, my father comes here in 1928, and then in 7 years, FDR is saying, you guys go back now. I barely have $60 to my name now. I got here. Where am I going to find the $60 to come back? Well, you want to come back? You don't get to come back. That's the thing. It was a one-way ticket. And get this, a lot of them went back. Well, no one went, very few went back. But if you went back, you had to go back through Angel Island. And I know some people in the Filipino community, a family related to mine, who actually came from the Philippines. And in 1935, they had to go to Angel Island because they were coming here. Which is strange because the Repatriation Act had people going back. And they remember there was people coming and going around that time. Angel Island, San Francisco. It's sort of like the West Coast Ellis Island. Another bit of little known Asian American history. I doubt if most people are going to learn a lot of those little things that happen. But if you're an Asian American studies major, you'll know it. And maybe it will spark that interest. It'll make people say, ah, you know, no one tells us this. And look, our country is now what? Well, we're only like 7% Asian American. But you look at a place like Harvard, where the student body is like 25% and growing, 25% Asian American. Or you go to any school like in the UC system, Berkeley's at 41% Asian. I mean, it kind of behooves people to get to know who you're going to school with. I know I can hear some people say, well, when people feared blacks, I mean, they didn't make us all take African American studies. Well, no, they didn't. But you know what? It probably wouldn't have been a bad idea. In fact, one of the best courses I ever took when I went to school, college, African American studies. This weekend, I watched The Dropout. I finished it up. I started it long ago, and I said, I'm going to wait till the trial. And then other things happened, and I lost interest. And, of course, I wanted to see what would happen with Sunny Balwani, because we know what happened with Elizabeth Holmes. Remember, this is Theranos. They had the revolutionary pinprick thing from a single prick of blood sample. You get all these different types of tests. It turned out to be a fraud. She didn't have the goods. She was charged with 11 counts of fraud, convicted of 4, had to do with investors. Sunny Balwani, who was her paramour, who later joined the company. Balwani, who was older, also person of color. Also, he was in sales. He was, he was wealthy, flashy, drove around in a Ferrari, had a big house. He was painted out to be the villain in this. 12 counts of fraud he was charged with, all 12 convicted. And you try to see, well, what happened here? And I think it's pretty obvious. Elizabeth Holmes took the stand. It was like a divorce. She took the stand. She spoke about abuse. She spoke about, being abused by this older guy, Sunny Balwani. I mean, I remember when her trial took place months before Balwani's, and I was kind of shocked when it was her turn to testify after hearing from consumers, after hearing from all these other people who were testifying, and her time on the stand, the headline was talking about abuse at the hands of her boyfriend, Sunny Balwani. It was almost like, is this a fraud case or is this a divorce proceeding? So that's Elizabeth Holmes. She was convicted of 4 of the 11 counts. She still faces 20 years. Sunny Balwani gets up, does his trial, 12 counts, all 12 guilty. He's the mastermind. He's the person in charge. He's the one who lied. Well, more than Elizabeth Holmes? But here's the thing. Did he take the stand? No. Did he refute any of the charges of abuse? Well, in the press he has, but not on the stand. I think Sunny Balwani, his attorneys miscalculated. I mean, look, they don't have to listen to me, but I think Sunny Balwani, if he took the stand, could have told his story about a heartbroken South Asian man who met this young girl years ago in China, developed a friendship. When she was in trouble, he was a well-to-do, high-tech executive. And then when he saw her struggling, he went in to save her. And he rose up in the country because of his love for her. They were in it together. I can't speak to the fraud parts, but this is part of the narrative, right? This is part of the narrative that they could have shaped. He was in love. He was in love with Elizabeth Holmes. And when it came to the critical moment, he betrayed her. That, to me, would have been appealing testimony. But I guess they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to open themselves up to that. The problem is, you got a jury, 7 women, 5 men, and they just heard Elizabeth Holmes, or probably a different jury, right? I mean, it's not the same jury. I know, I have to check that. But if they know anything about the case, they shouldn't have. Maybe that's the deal. If they didn't know anything about what she said. I mean, we who are out here in the public, we're different. I mean, we hear everything. We can hear everything. We can go down different paths and rabbit holes and do all these things. The jury's really sequestered. They're told not to talk about the case or read up about the case. But one wonders. 7 women, 5 men. Did they see Elizabeth Holmes as this vulnerable, charming, vulnerable, soft, young thing, somehow manipulated by Sunny Balwani? I could see it, but, and then I don't know if it's true, but she does go to her trial with her boyfriend, now husband, her baby, a sign of love, a sign of family, a sign of sympathy, which I'm sure helped a little bit in terms of the emotional connection with the jury. So I just think that when you put it all together like this, I think Sunny Balwani got screwed over, because I don't think for a moment that he was any more devious or any more lying or fraudulent than Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes got the glory. Elizabeth Holmes was the person out there, the face of the company. Sunny Balwani, he just made sure the back end was working and the people were showing up to work. And I just think that Elizabeth Holmes was able to get, fewer convictions on the counts. Will it make a difference? 20 years, that's what they face. I don't know. It's interesting. From what I read, I don't really separate the two. And I know that's what Elizabeth Holmes was trying to do when she said, look, I was abused. Me too. And Sunny Balwani was saying, well, we were in love, and I was there to save her business and make it grow. It was more like a divorce proceeding and not like a fraud trial. Because if it were just on that, I think both of them, all the same counts. There was one where they, like I said, Elizabeth Holmes was only convicted of 4 of 11. But it indicates how the jury is looking at this and how they see her differently than him. And really, is it fair? Sunny Balwani would never say this. But as an observer, I could. Do you think he was guilty of a kind of bias here? I mean, he's probably too proudful to say that. But I think from an observer's point of view, I think definitely there was a little bias. Bias that suggested that, oh, here's this old guy, he should have known better. He shouldn't have picked on this quote, little girl. She's no little girl. She was driven. And I think that kind of mitigates against your feeling that, oh, she's so vulnerable. Well, she was driven. She knew what she was doing. And let's see what happens. The sentencing is coming up later this year. Both of them face 20 years. Elizabeth Holmes has the kid, the new husband. Let's see how long that lasts. If it's really love, I just, I think the takeaway though, I mean, they say there's going to be fallout. It's going to be tough for young women, right? But I don't know. I don't think you can well, what do I know? I'm not in the Silicon Valley game. People are going to want to see a lot more proof. They're going to want to see a lot more data to support your projections. And I think they're not going to fall for things. Although, look, this is what the whole idea of the Valley and the dream, right? It's all about a dream. Everyone has a dream, be it Elizabeth Holmes, Sonny Balwani, Willie Guillermo, Joe Guillermo, the dreamers. We all have a dream. How far will you go to try to achieve it? So that's it for our show today. I mean, we're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific Live. Tomorrow, I guess we'll talk about January 6th. We'll see what they talk about. They'll get the Oath Keepers on oath tomorrow. That's kind of an interesting story. People buzzing about Sheila Jackson Lee actually Brittany Griner. Sheila Jackson Lee I saw on one of the talk shows. She was saying that, look, Griner's a good person. She's getting framed. One thing that people don't talk about when they talk about Brittany Griner is that she's an LGBTQ. Ask your Russian friends how tolerated LGBTQ people are in Russia. Between that, between the kind of shame and scolding that Russia has gone under on the international level for doping, for drugging. I mean, I think these WNBA players who play abroad in women's league kind of set themselves up as American players. They make a lot of money, but they set themselves up for things like this to be made an example of by Putin, and because that's clearly what's going on. And then they lock them up and throw away the key, and there they are, examples that are used on both sides in Russia, to Russians and to the world, a flexing of the muscle of authoritarianism. And it just, I'm saddened by this, because I've always been a big Brittany Griner fan. I hope something happens soon, because, and we always have to shine some light on this, because it just cannot be forgotten. A couple other items I want to mention. I guess we could talk about this tomorrow. The New York Times had this poll among Democrats. 64% say anybody but Biden. I don't know. Listen to my past shows, 341, 340, 339. I talk about how Biden can't be blamed, but a lot of voters can't see beyond the fact that Biden has got to do something with inflation, got to do something about prices. They're looking for a scapegoat. Democracy's scapegoat. It's not fair. It's definitely not fair. But I have to admit, it kind of worries me what's going to happen, because the rumblings are out there, and it's going to disrupt the midterms. The Biden campaign, the Biden administration is going to be so critical, or so is going to be paying attention. There's no room for error. And I just don't know. I mean, all right, so Biden's not the one who is. That frankly worries me. Okay, we'll talk about some of the other things tomorrow. Don't forget the show tonight. Tonight's show, 5:30 p.m. Oh, I do want to mention, if you haven't seen this, the Washington Post has taken this Monday to do this big takeout on an international investigation it's done on Uber and how Uber flex its muscles and, threaten drivers into signing up with Uber. Here's the thing about these companies. You think that tech-oriented companies are the good guys. I mean, sometimes they are. But it really kind of sickens me when I see a company that is part of that new generation, and they are worse. They are worse than your typical corporate concern. In fact, they are no different from the typical corporate concerns. So it's they happen to have a top executive who gave these files to the Post, and it exposes Uber's tactics in expanding to Europe and in South Africa, and with even Russia. And it talks about how Uber saw itself and how it tried to position itself to be not just a player, but a dominant monopolistic player. And if you read it, I don't know. If you ever thought who's better, Uber or Lyft, after this, I think you'll be deleting your Uber file, your own Uber app. I mean, it really is scary to think that for market share, for business, this is what Uber was willing to do. And when you see how they went in this big global investigation called the Uber Files, it makes you wonder about all big companies and how ethical and how moral and how maybe the only ones you can trust are the small guys, the mom and pops, the guys who check their balance sheet every month because they're living on it, and the big corporate America. What's wrong with it? Well, look at the Uber Files. Big Washington Post takeout. It's on there now online. Like I said, if you ever had a question if you should be Uber or Lyft, well, I think you'll know if you read this. All right, so tonight, again, it's Pay What You Want tonight. Come, it's on eventbrite.com. It's a virtual pop-up, Emil Muck story time on 7-Eleven. This is my dad. My dad came 94 years ago. And we will, like I said, I'm telling the story in this style where I don't really know what I'm going to say. No, I do know what I'm going to say, but I don't really know where it's going to go. It should be fascinating. It should be a great little, not train wreck, but maybe a car wreck. But, you turn and look at that, right? All right. So you read all my columns, aldef.org/blog, inquirer.net, inquirer.net. Hey, check out YouTube, facebook.com/EmilGuillermo.media. Also, Twitter @Emil Amok, EMIL, AMOK. Also, AMOK.com. You get information about me, see our live show, this live show there. And I'll see you again tonight at 5:30 p.m. Pacific for the Storytime Slam. All right, regular listeners of our show, you know who you are. I just want to say it's just all about love, isn't it? It really, it just boils down to the love thing. It's always about, it sounds corny, but if you lead with love and not with fear, that's probably the most important thing you can do. The other thing is that the love you show, it's self-love, but self-love usually begins with showing it for other people. And then it kind of takes a U-turn and comes back to you. Try that. I mean, if you can try it, loving yourself first. Yeah, that works. And then showing the love. And then when you show it, it comes back twofold, threefold. That's good too. But the idea is ultimately it ends up with being self-love, regenerating, creating more. Try it. As opposed to being in that fear-based world where you're judging and you're criticizing and you're mean and you're saying all these things. Oh, Emil, haven't you just been judging and being critical in this show? Well, yeah, but from a high-minded, loving perspective. Oh, is that it, Emil? Yeah. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo, go to the Eventbrite, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Story time. Tonight only. Till next time. Emil here. Mahal.